Listen, I know how this sounds, like typical office trash talk, but this isn't just a story for views. A woman works in an office and grew up listening to her carry entire departments on her shoulders while her bosses say she wasn't doing anything special. This story is about real life experiences, so that someone will recognize themselves in it, so that someone won't repeat the same mistakes.
Boss says you don't really contribute. That's what Mason said, pointing at me like I was a substitute teacher caught grading papers while the class went wild. His first day, whole floor watching, laughter bubbling up from marketing, ops, even the junior data analyst I trained 2 years ago. I'd barely sipped my coffee. He said it with a smirk, like he thought he was doing me a favor by saying it out loud, like he expected me to crumble. Instead, I smiled, calm, measured, dead quiet inside. Perfect, I said, shutting my laptop. Then the free work ends today. And just like that, the room went still, like when the power cuts out and you finally hear how loud the silence can be. Mason blinked. Someone dropped their pen. I stood, adjusted my chair, and walked out. By the way, if you've made it this far and you're listening without subscribing, take 2 seconds. Just click subscribe and tap the like. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these stories coming. All right, back to it. I didn't go far, just the break room, really. Poured the rest of my lukewarm coffee down the sink and stared out the grimy window. October haze over the skyline. My name wasn't on the building, but its backbone was mine. 5 years. That's how long I'd been keeping the wheels spinning at Greenrock Equity. Not in the headlines, no. Not in the fancy investor updates with soft jazz and buzzwords. But behind it all, my data pipeline, my automation, my code, the stuff that turned noise into insight and made execs look competent on quarterly calls. They didn't know how the sausage got made. That was fine by me. Until Mason Drury showed up. Mason, fresh from some overpriced MBA program where saying synergy 6 times in a pitch deck got you a standing ovation. Blonde hair too perfect for someone in finance. Loafers with no socks. He walked in like he was auditioning to be the face of the firm, and from the way the CFO hovered near him all week, maybe he was. He didn't ask questions. He gave orders. His first memo made me laugh. Decentralized reporting, he said. Let the business units own their numbers. I replied once, briefly. That violates audit protocol and breaks data lineage, I wrote. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. The next morning, my access to the master reporting folder was gone. Not archived, not moved, deleted. The kicker? Mason didn't even realize he hadn't deleted the real system, just the dashboard shell, the pretty stuff. The data engine lived somewhere else, quiet, invisible, like me. ArcBridge Data LLC. That name wasn't on any org chart, but it was on the invoice. Every quarter, vendor code GDX7, a white-labeled overlay I created, maintained, and, yes, licensed, to Greenrock, to the company I worked for. The same company Mason just decided didn't need my spreadsheets anymore. See? The dashboards, the forecasts, the heat maps that got the CEO a $600K bonus last spring? Not built in Excel, built through ArcBridge, hosted on my private server space, integrated with 4 separate Greenrock systems. And the contract? Clause 4.6b. Service continuity contingent upon vendor recognition and uninterrupted terms, which meant the moment Mason invalidated the contract by publicly declaring the work unneeded, he pulled the plug. Not metaphorically, literally. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push back. Because I knew what would happen next. The kind of silence that costs millions. I remember reading Mason's first memo and blinking twice like maybe I was hallucinating a BuzzFeed listicle disguised as corporate strategy. Decentralized reporting. Let the business units own their own numbers. That was the headline. Beneath it, a minefield of cheerfully written delusion. He called it the democratization of data. I called it a slow-motion compliance nightmare. I flagged concerns politely. I always was polite, even to idiots. There were governance layers, literal legal requirements on how numbers had to be pulled, formatted, and time-stamped. Risk alignment rules, audit trail obligations. Institutional investors don't care if sales feels like they had a good quarter. They want traceable projections. You don't just let Todd from product guess his own burn rate. Mason waved it off with the grace of someone who didn't know what a rollback was. We'll make it agile, he said, like he was pitching an app at a startup demo night. I asked if he'd read the 38-page reporting policy. He smiled like I'd asked him to recite the periodic table. You've been here a while, he said. You worry too much about old rules. Right. Like Sarbani's Oxley is a bedtime story. Then he stood up at the Tuesday stand-up and made a show of it, pulled up my shared folders, looked at me while dragging and dropping everything into the trash like a third grader erasing a chalkboard. We're cleaning house, he said. From now on, insights live with the departments. No more black box reporting. And the room clapped. Not all of them, but enough. People who didn't understand how fragile the system was. People who thought simplifying meant deleting the person who knew where the wires were buried. It was strange, watching him do it. He moved fast, like someone playing a role he'd been promised since birth. That kind of confidence doesn't come from knowledge. It's inherited. It's the kind of ego you get when failure's never been fatal, when someone's always ready to fix your mess or fund your next one. I could have stopped him. One line of code and the whole pipeline would have reasserted itself. But I didn't. I watched, calm, measured, let him delete the visible pieces like scraping paint off a house he didn't realize was built on steel rebar. What Mason didn't know, and hadn't bothered to ask, is that the dashboards weren't files. They were endpoints, outputs. Pretty packaging for a back-end orchestration system I'd spent 4 years building. A system that lived off-network, licensed, partitioned, independent. GreenRock didn't even technically own it. They just rented the view. That morning, I called my attorney, asked him to review the ArcBridge licensing agreement. Just in case, I said. He chuckled. They breach it? Not yet, I said, but they're about to. Meanwhile, Mason was in full-on vision board mode, talking to department heads about insight streams and real-time ownership, scheduling meetings to teach finance how to interpret raw system logs, as if turning off the GPS would somehow teach them to navigate by starlight. And all the while, the board still expected Q3 forecasts. The CEO still had a call with Horizon Partners next Thursday. The investors still wanted trend lines, variance breakdowns, and risk overlays. They just didn't know the pipeline was gone. Not broken, not offline. Gone. I gave it 3 days. Tops. It was Monday morning. 8:46 a.m. to be exact, but Mason had already been circling the office like a rooster looking for a henhouse to rule. The entire floor smelled like too much cologne and not enough competence. He barged into our daily stand-up like he was storming Normandy with a PowerPoint deck, walked straight into the center of the circle, clapped once, loud, and scanned the room like a game show host who thought he was funny. Then he pointed at me. Not figuratively. I mean, literally extended one smug, manicured finger and aimed it dead at my face. Boss says you don't really contribute, he announced with the confidence of someone whose only KPI was existing loudly. You just sit there with your spreadsheets. That's over now. Silence cracked for a moment as a few people chuckled, mostly the ones still angling for a seat at Mason's rapidly inflating ego table. I saw it all in slow motion, the smirk from Dave in marketing, the raised eyebrows from Jules in product, even poor Alicia, who looked like she wanted to melt through the floor and apologize on his behalf. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just reached forward, closed my laptop like I was sealing a casket and said, calm, clear, and colder than concrete, perfect. Then the free work ends today. It was like I had detonated a soundproof bomb. The silence didn't just return, it multiplied. You could hear someone's phone buzzing from across the building. I stood up, not fast, not slow, picked up my mug, walked out, not another word. And just like that, it began. Because the thing Mason and everyone else laughing didn't realize, those spreadsheets he mocked, they were just the garnish. The real engine ran beneath, humming quietly, integrating systems that had no business talking to each other. I'd spent half a decade stitching together APIs, aligning temporal datasets, sanitizing client inputs, patching vendor systems that broke at 2 a.m. because some dev overseas thought UTC and local time were the same thing. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because no one else could. And now I wouldn't. Back at my desk, I triggered a kill switch script. Not destruction, never that. Just a graceful, contract-compliant pause. The pipeline that fueled GreenRock's performance dashboards, predictive models, compliance summaries, all of it. halted, legally, peacefully, like a tenant who'd stopped paying rent because the landlord forgot there was a lease. Mason went on talking for another 10 minutes after I left, apparently. Rambled something about fresh perspectives and empowerment. Didn't even notice the faces in the room weren't following him. People were checking Slack, email, Jira boards, and slowly realizing that the world they relied on had stopped spinning. At 9:13 a.m., marketing flagged an issue. Quarterly stats weren't loading. At 9:21, sales pinged me politely now, wondering if I had any visibility into the revenue delta trends. At 9:33, finance opened a ticket about broken macros. By 9:46, legal was asking for access to whatever system you've been using for board updates. But I didn't respond. Not because I was mad, because I was done. The room that had snickered an hour earlier was now quiet again, but this time it wasn't because of Mason's mouth. It was because something had gone missing, something vital, and for the first time, they were starting to realize it wasn't a spreadsheet. It was me. There's something beautiful about building something no one notices until it's gone. For 5 years, the lifeblood of GreenRock's investor reporting didn't come from Excel or Tableau or whatever Mason thought I was clicking around in. It came from a pipeline I'd built by hand, script by script, night by night, tested during holidays, patched during storms. Not because anyone asked, because I knew what would happen if I didn't. They thought I was quiet because I lacked ideas. Truth is, I was quiet because I didn't need applause to do my job. And my job was everything they leaned on without even realizing it. The investor decks, Mason's precious Q3 forecast, the CEO's trendline walkthroughs. All of it was built by ArcBridge, my consulting entity, not a side hustle, a legitimate vendor, whitelisted through legal, vetted by procurement, signed off by compliance, and buried in the depths of the finance vendor registry under a single line item, GDX7, billed quarterly, paid like clockwork, a white-labeled operational overlay with performance guarantees and automated fallbacks. Nobody questioned it. Not because they trusted me, but because it never failed. ArcBridge didn't just scrape numbers from a database and spit them into PDFs. It pulled live transactional data from 5 different internal systems, reconciled them, normalized inputs, created predictive models, layered on audit trails and compliance notes, and did it all behind the curtain so the execs could walk on stage like they'd handcrafted the symphony themselves. I'd mentioned the license once, 2 years ago, in a compliance call. The controller had nodded, checked a box, and never asked again. Legal approved the contract, probably because it had all the right buzzwords and none of the obvious red flags. It was clean, invisible, like me. Mason, of course, never saw it. He assumed everything ran on a Google sheet and a prayer, that you could point a few fingers, shuffle some team leads, and reinvent operational reporting over brunch. He never looked under the hood, never asked what powered the quarterly magic. He thought the dashboards were the system, not the output. And now that I'd stepped away, he was about to find out how wrong he was. What I'd paused wasn't some petty revenge tactic. It was a contractual right. Clause 2.4 of the ArcBridge Service Agreement stated clearly, operational access may be suspended upon verbal or written indication by client that services are no longer necessary or desired. That sentence was reviewed, redlined, and initialed by GreenRock's own legal team. Mason had made that declaration, publicly, at a meeting, in front of witnesses. I had the recording, and yes, legally I was allowed to record it. I was in the room, and more importantly, I had been ready for this the moment he walked in on day 1 and called me the spreadsheet lady. So when I flipped the switch and ArcBridge went dark, it wasn't personal. It was procedural. The API endpoints returned 403 errors. The automated report queue stopped polling. The cache refresh loop halted. From the outside, it looked like a glitch, but under the hood, it was a clean disengagement. Mason still hadn't noticed. He was too busy high-fiving people in the hallway about his culture shift. I let him talk, let him smile, let him schedule meetings with stakeholders to roll out his distributed reporting initiative. He didn't realize he'd just decapitated the system and left the body twitching. The thing about people like Mason is they confuse visibility with control. Just because you're the loudest voice in the room doesn't mean you understand the room. And the quieter someone is, the more likely they're the one holding the wires. I wasn't angry. I was focused. The trap wasn't baited. It was built. And it had just been triggered. At exactly 10:07 a.m., the first crack echoed through the floor. Marketing pinged the group thread. Is the investor dashboard down for anyone else? Someone joked about IT updates. Someone else dropped a GIF. But I knew that was the first domino. By 10:12, 3 more messages came in. Finance, strategy, and one from the COO's chief of staff asking why the Q3 snapshot looked empty. At 10:19, legal's assistant asked for the quarterly risk forecast. I said nothing, didn't type, didn't blink, just watched. At 10:30, it escalated. Finance flagged audit directly. Revenue trending data is missing across both primary and backup dashboards. Requesting lineage verification. That's when the panic started, because for years, every chart, every pretty deck, every "we're tracking ahead of target" statement had leaned on that pipeline, and now it was blank. Not outdated, not lagging. Blank. Someone from sales dug up an old performance spreadsheet from 2 quarters ago, tried uploading it manually into the central tracker. The system spat it back. Unauthorized vendor access. They tried again and again. Same message. It wasn't a glitch. It was the firewall doing what it was designed to do, protect proprietary structure. ArcBridge's backend didn't just generate reports. It verified inputs, sanitized noise, ensured no one could backdoor tamper with forecast data just to impress an investor. But now, it was paused. Not broken. Not sabotaged. Paused. As per my rights under Section 2.4 of the vendor contract, when Mason mocked my spreadsheets, he inadvertently declared publicly that the client no longer desired the service, and in doing so, triggered the exact clause I had written, buried, and secured under 3 layers of compliance review. His words severed the feed. His words pulled the plug. And it all unraveled before lunch. At 10:47, I heard voices through the wall of my office. Sharp, urgent ones. Someone said data breach. Someone else said outage. Wrong on both counts. There was no breach, no hack, just the precise surgical silence of an abandoned pipeline obeying its own rules. I got a Slack from Alicia. Just a sad face emoji and "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. By 11:00, the office air had thickened into panic. It was rebooting things that had nothing to do with the pipeline. People were unplugging and replugging in monitors like that was going to summon Q3 trends from the ether. Mason was finally pacing. Face red, voice high-pitched, tossing around acronyms like candy he didn't understand. And then I heard the kicker. Why can't we just rebuild it? One of the engineers tried to explain that it wasn't a script, that the entire process was embedded in logic blocks tied to a vendor API that no longer authorized access, that no one had root access except the vendor, which meant me. By 11:22, legal had entered the chat. Literally, a message popped into the central ops thread. Can someone confirm who holds current access rights to ArcBridge LLC systems? Silence. Then 3 people tagged me. Still, I didn't respond. This wasn't vengeance. This was inertia, cause and effect. For years, they asked me to be invisible, dependable, low maintenance, so I became all those things. And now, they couldn't see the wires until they snapped. That's the thing about systems like mine. When they run perfectly, people forget they exist, until they're gone. And by then, it's too late to learn how they worked. Mason thought I was optional. Turns out, I was infrastructure. At 11:04 a.m., the message went out company-wide. Investor presentation canceled. Will reschedule. 14 words that detonated through Greenrock like a bomb wrapped in corporate PR, no explanation, no fallback time, just silence, followed by panic. The CEO canceled it himself. Not his admin, not his chief of staff. Him. And that alone told everyone in the building that the situation wasn't just urgent. It was existential. That presentation was supposed to go live at noon sharp. A multi-slide walkthrough of Q3 performance, projections, client retention numbers, and trendline overlays. Something we delivered every quarter like clockwork. Something they all thought just happened. Only now it wasn't happening, because there was no deck, and they couldn't fake one. Compliance had stepped in hard. Someone must have tried to manually assemble a last-minute Frankenstein presentation, pulling screenshots from whatever was still visible. But it didn't matter. You can't greenlight investor materials without full traceability. Every number, every source, every timestamp. ArcBridge had automated all that. It was the scaffolding behind the slides. And now that scaffolding had disappeared, that's when legal stepped in. By 11:16, they had pulled my contract out of the vendor archive. Someone from the general counsel's office printed it. Someone else highlighted 3 separate paragraphs. Then someone, probably Mason, asked if they were sure about the language. So they read it again, then a third time. And the clause that stopped everything cold was buried halfway down page 5 under Service Continuity and Suspension Triggers. It read, "Vendor reserves the right to suspend operational services immediately upon any formal or informal communication from client or its representatives indicating that services are no longer required, or that the vendor's role has been diminished, discontinued, or replaced." No one could argue what had happened. There were witnesses, video, Slack messages. That morning's stand-up wasn't just inappropriate, it was a contractual landmine. Mason's little performance, his grinning, "you don't really contribute" routine, that wasn't just offensive. It was legally binding. He'd made a statement of discontinuation in front of the entire floor. He'd voided the vendor agreement with a single sentence. And now the pipeline was down, compliantly. I wasn't even in the room when he realized it. But people told me later how pale he went. They said he went from cocky to corpse in 30 seconds. First, he asked if the contract could be clarified. Then he asked if legal was overreacting. Then he just stopped talking. Because the part he didn't know, couldn't have known, is that ArcBridge wasn't just some internal process I'd outsourced on the side. It was a full, modular platform with proprietary architecture. Custom-built, licensed, and protected. The back-end IP, mine, the scripts, encrypted, the access protocols, rotated every 30 days through a private key that lived outside the company. GreenRock never owned the engine, they rented the ride, and now their access was revoked. Not out of revenge, not out of malice, out of Mason's own damn mouth. At 11:41, a VP from Investor Relations asked, "Can we get a simplified version of last quarter's report?" The answer was no. Not without lineage, not without traceable compliance, not without the pipeline. The CEO locked himself in his office. No one saw him until after 2. Mason sat in the kitchen area, staring at a half-drunk protein shake, phone in hand, not speaking. His confidence drained from him like air from a balloon. No one patted his back. No one joked anymore. He looked smaller, quieter. And for the first time since he arrived, he stopped trying to be the loudest person in the room. It's funny. He spent all that time mocking what he didn't understand, cutting out what he couldn't control. And now, standing in the wreckage, it finally hit him. He hadn't deleted a report. He'd pulled the plug on the entire nervous system of the company, and the only person who could reconnect it wasn't picking up. At 2:17 p.m. exactly, the email came in. Subject line, "Request for service continuation discussion." Sender, legal@greenrockequity.com, not Mason, not the COO, not even someone from strategy, just legal, formal, cold, stripped of the usual corporate cheer. The message was short, almost sterile. "We're reaching out to inquire whether ArcBridge Data LLC would consider reactivating service under revised terms. Please let us know availability to discuss as soon as possible." No apology, no accountability. Just urgency wrapped in politeness, the corporate version of white flag diplomacy. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My attorney did. He replied less than an hour later with an attached scan, 1 page, no fluff. Just black and white clarity with a blue signature at the bottom and a 6-digit number they weren't ready to see. Clause 4.6b, unannounced suspension of vendor relationship triggers early termination penalty, $3,200,000 USD, not negotiable, not theoretical, executable upon breach. And they had breached spectacularly. There was no need to threaten. The contract was already weaponized, not by malice, but by foresight. I'd written that clause 3 years ago, after an early scare when a junior VP had suggested bringing data operations in-house to save money. It wasn't even personal, just protective. Quiet insurance, buried in sub-paragraphs, fully reviewed by Greenrock's own legal counsel back when they still trusted the quiet woman in the corner with the headphones and the purple coffee mug. Now it was active. My lawyer didn't even bother with a phone call. Just attached the invoice, cited the clause, and copied 2 partners from our firm. If Greenrock wanted ArcBridge back, they'd pay the cost of recklessness. And Mason? He vanished. No Slack pings, no pop-ins, no hallway pep talks about synergy or ownership culture. His office doors stayed closed. His Outlook calendar suddenly cleared. I heard someone saw him leaving through the side stairwell around 3:30, clutching his messenger bag like it might shield him from the fallout. What people don't understand about arrogance, especially inherited arrogance, is that it's brittle. It looks solid, but it cracks fast under weight. Mason thought confidence was a strategy. That talking louder made him smarter. That being the boss's son-in-law made him untouchable. He never planned for resistance, never imagined someone beneath his radar could push back with something heavier than pride. But legal paper doesn't flinch. I went for a walk around the block after the invoice went out. The air had cooled a bit. Late afternoon sun casting long shadows. When I came back, 3 unread emails waited, all marked urgent. All asking for terms of reinstatement, not for an apology, not for forgiveness, just for a reboot, a reset, a return to normal. But there was no normal anymore. They hadn't just unplugged a system, they'd broken trust, declared war on the very infrastructure that kept them functional, and now they were learning what dependency feels like. Quiet, uncomfortable, unyielding. Somewhere upstairs, executives were probably in damage control. I imagined Mason sitting across from the CFO, trying to explain what he had done, trying to spin it. Maybe even pretending he didn't know what he said had consequences. Maybe blaming me, or pretending he was misunderstood. But the documents didn't care about tone. The silence that followed was louder than any speech he could have given. And the number at the bottom of the invoice? It was just the beginning. That Friday, they called a special session. Quietly. No calendar invites with smiley faces, no catered breakfast. Just a 9 a.m. block marked board, closed session. Most employees didn't even know it was happening until afterward, when someone noticed that the exec wing was locked down and 2 board members had flown in from New York the night before. Mason wasn't invited, not even as an observer. By then, the facts were laid bare. The investor fallout had been contained barely, with a vague statement about unexpected systems maintenance. But everyone knew the truth internally. Departments had spent 4 days frozen, blindfolded, paralyzed. Mason's decentralization memo was quietly scrubbed from the internal wiki, his new reporting vision deck deleted from Drive. One engineer told me it was like someone tried to delete a brain and replace it with a magic 8-ball. And now the adults were in the room. The vote took less than an hour. ArcBridge would be reinstated, effective immediately. But this time, the terms were ironclad. The agreement could not be terminated without a joint motion from both the board and legal counsel. No more executive whim, no more VP egos. The system was too important, too central, too proven. I wasn't there to see the vote happen. But I got a call from my attorney at 10:14 a.m. He didn't say much, just that the new agreement had been signed, the penalty processed, and the board had approved full restoration. "Do they want a meeting?" I asked. He chuckled. "Nope, they want uptime." So I flipped the switch. At 6:01 a.m. the next morning, the ArcBridge pipeline came back online. No ceremony, no broadcast. Just a quiet handshake signal between nodes, a soft whirring of automated processes resuming like nothing ever happened. Reports began to populate, dashboards filled in, alerts synced, audit logs lit up green again. By 7 a.m., marketing had their forecasts, finance had their variance models, risk had their exposure trees. It was as if the blackout never happened, because I hadn't deleted a thing. People had asked me, during the week-long chaos, why I didn't just wipe the data, burn it all down, teach them a real lesson. But that's not who I am. My job wasn't revenge, it was resilience. I didn't need to scorch the earth to prove a point. I just needed them to feel the weight of what they took for granted. And Mason? His keycard stopped working that same morning. I heard he showed up around 8:30 a.m., tried to badge in, and got red lighted at the turnstile. Security said his name was no longer active in the system. He stood there for a while, phone in hand, texting someone who wasn't answering. Then he left, shoulders low, coat folded over one arm, eyes not meeting anyone's. No announcement was made. No email from HR, just a name that slowly vanished from directories, Slack threads, and company lore. The irony? I never asked for that. Never requested he be removed. That part was the company's decision. Maybe it was politics. Maybe it was liability. Maybe the board finally realized that some titles are just noise. But systems? Real systems? They endure. And for the first time since Mason walked in, Greenrock chose the system over the showman. Every Friday at 2 p.m. sharp, the same signal fires off. A synthetic test file, small, clean, harmless, runs through the Arc Bridge pipeline. It doesn't contain client data or forecasts or anything flashy, just a ping. A silent pulse that checks the entire system from entry to exit. Think of it like a heartbeat. Invisible, steady, and utterly essential. If that ping fails, every screen in the executive suite stays dark. It never fails. The log reads the same every time. Source, ArcBridge, status, green. Nobody talks about it. Nobody celebrates it. Most people don't even know it exists. But legal sees the report. So does the CTO. And the board? They know. I haven't been to a Friday sync in months. I don't need to be there. I designed the pipeline to be self-healing, self-checking, self-verifying. That was always the point. Quiet durability, no performance, no ego. After everything that happened, I was offered a new title, some VP role with a bloated budget and an office closer to the windows. I turned it down. I didn't want a corner suite. I wanted peace. I negotiated a retainer through ArcBridge instead. Strategic vendor, indefinite terms, direct board reporting, no middle management. Now, I come in when I want, or not at all. Sometimes I'll stop by the cafe across the street around 2:30, sip a cold brew, and glance at my phone. See the test log roll in. Green. Always green. That's how I know it's working. That they're still standing on something solid, something I built. I hear Mason landed somewhere in the valley, some VC-backed startup with a buzzword name and a podcast. Last I checked, he was talking about leadership trauma and learning through failure. Good for him. Let him learn. As for me, I don't post on LinkedIn, don't tweet threads about resilience, don't mentor or keynote or brand myself as a thought leader. I just maintain the rails. Because legacies aren't always loud. Sometimes they're the infrastructure no one notices until it's gone. And mine still hums. Every Friday at 2 p.m. handshake. Status, green, forever.